Morning. Good morning. Good to see everyone this morning on this Lord's Day. Welcome to Sunday School. Trust that you're all ready for this big day here, huh? Thanksgiving weekend for us. So good to see you all out this morning. God bless you for being here. And as you find a comfortable spot there, we want to say happy birthday this week to Nathan Kilgore. Mary, Nathan's birthday's this week, isn't it? All right, so we got a candy bar up here for him. Make sure you get that before you go home and let him know happy birthday. Tell him happy birthday for all of us. Good to see Wayne here this morning. Good to see Grant from California here spending time with the holidays with his parents. So, and thank you for being here. Well, they say welcome and welcome back. Welcome back. We're in the book of Hebrews. And we are about a chapter and a half away from being finished with this. So this morning I was talking to Trish and mentioned that. She said, what are we going to do next? I said, I don't know for sure, but there's a couple possibilities. So Hebrews chapter 12. Everyone have a good week. And be thinking in the morning service about maybe giving a quick couple sentence word of thanks, a testimony that is a testimony of your gratitude to God and the things He has in your life. I like everyone to, but at least a few folks to just provide an opportunity of service for that, just to verbally share with others about how blessed you are and how grateful you are for those things. So in Hebrews chapter 12, remember the theme of the book is what? Jesus is better. Jesus is better. So we're going to move out of chapter 12 shortly into chapter 13, and I will finish up the book. And chapter 13 is more one of those, you might say, practical things. It gives us a lot of imperatives. Do this, be this way, think this, act that way. But before we get there, he's going to kind of finish out his main argument of the whole book, and that is Jesus is better, and faith is the better principle and better way of living. And so he's going to remind them of what's to come, what they have faith in. And verse 18, I think, is where we'll pick up at. We've covered up to verse 17. Was that 2 weeks ago? Seems like a long time ago. But in verse 18 through 24, he's going to compare two mounts, M-O-U-N-T-S, two mounts. Mount Sinai, which they would be very familiar with, and Mount Zion. Let's read this, verse 18. For ye are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burnt with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that they entreated the word should not be spoken unto them any more. Verse 20 of Hebrews 12. For they could not endure which was commanded. And if so much as a beast touched the mountain, it should be stoned or thrust through with a dart. Now, the next verse 2 with verse 21 goes with that. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. Now, do you see parentheses for 20 and 21? It's kind of explaining what 18 and 19 said to us. So he's talking about this Mount Sinai, how terrible, dreaded it was. In fact, they were told to put a fence around, a border around, so to speak, so they wouldn't get too close, because if they touched it, it would mean death for them. It's sort of like you have people where there's, I'm thinking over, what's they call it, horseshoe bend, horseshoe whatever page. For a long time, I guess they do now have some of it, but for a long time they didn't have any kind of railing. And you always have that one or two people every few minutes that like to go to the edge and like to tempt fate and so forth. And every so often, we've all read the reports, right? They find the body down below. Well, with Mount Sinai, they didn't want that to be the danger. They thought, hey, let's set a room between us and it so we don't just inadvertently go up and touch it because of all the dread and the tempest that was connected with it. So we pick up in verse 22. But ye are coming to Mount Zion. So previously he was talking about Mount Sinai. Now he's talking about what will be the Mount Zion, that future spiritual and physical place. And unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, which speaketh better things than that of Abel. So what he's citing is in contrast, comparing the old Mount Sinai with the new, comparing the old covenant with the new covenant. In Mount Sinai, the holiness of God was the issue there. It was about the fear of his displeasure. And you'll notice by looking at the verbiage of 18 and 19 again, for you're not coming to the mount that might be touched and that burn with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words. He says this is not what we're to think about. That's what it was. But what we're going to look forward to is Mount Sinai. It's about a living God. It's about a holy city, a Jerusalem. And that's why our eschatology really needs to be spot on with the scriptures, because in our eschatology, we have not only a millennial earth that we're going to be here for 1,000 years, but we have a new heaven and a new earth that's going to be perfect in every sense. I was talking this week, my barber, the guy I go to that is a barber, he pastors a church part-time in St. George, and he's a little different than we are, but he's pretty spot on with a lot of things. And I asked him about the new heaven and the new earth. And I said, what size do you think the new earth would be? He thinks it's going to be tremendously bigger than what we have now. I said, well, no one knows for sure, really. It could be any size. But one thing we do know, the Bible talks about there won't be the oceans on the new earth. These bodies of water that we have now, and 70% of the earth's surface is taken up by water. And those bodies of water basically have separated nations and people. And so we won't have that like we have it now. But whatever size it is, it'll be the perfect size, won't it? And there'll be room for you and all the ones that are going to be saved. There'll be room for all of them. But in verse 22, notice how he says, but ye are coming to Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God, and the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels. That's an interesting word. How many angels are there? Well, yeah, and even we go beyond a lot. We go to innumerable. Innumerable means what, essentially? Yeah, it can't be numbered, is it? You would run out of numbers. And people think, well, how do you fit all them in? Well, they're ministering spirits, so they don't need to fit, do they? But they're real, and they're ministering spirits to who? For us, to come and minister to us. That's why in chapter 13 of James, or of Hebrews, look in verse number 2 of chapter 13. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now, that's an interesting verse we'll cover more later. But there are times that angels are there ministering to us that we're not even aware of. And so if you figure that God has forsaken you and you're all alone, stop. Because his angels are there. You're not all alone. The Holy Spirit's with you, number one, always. And Christ in you always. But and plus, beyond that, is these ministering angels. Innumerable company of angels. Now in the Bible, what number, what amount do they usually refer to? And even in our hymns, in our psalm books, to be one of those numbers that means a trillion, zillion, 10,000. Yeah, we've been there 10,000 years and whatnot. But here it chooses to use the word innumerable angels. But not only that, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn. That's interesting. Who will be there with? The general assembly and the church of the firstborn. By the way, what does the word church usually come from in the New Testament, in the Greek? Ecclesia. And it means a called out assembly. What some people think this is it's breaking it down into the Old Testament saints, because the church, as we know it today, was something the Old Testament didn't know much, if anything, about. It was more of a New Testament phenomenon. And so this is the Old Testament saints and the church of the firstborn. Who is the firstborn? Well, it's of Jesus Christ. Now, not that he was born and brought into existence, but it means rank and priority, like he's the first, the only begotten. And so this is talking who it is there. And it says, which are written in heaven. Little phrase, which, don't let it slip by, which is written in heaven. What is written in heaven? What's that book? Book of life. And in Revelation, when the great white throne takes place, he's going to open the books and judge those that are there. And then he's going to look at the book of life, the Lamb's book of life, and the ones that are not written there, which will be all those at the judgment, will be cast into the lake of fire. That's why when we sing that song, I've got a new name written down in heaven. How's that go? And it's mine, and it's mine. And the white robe angels sing the glory. Dun, 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 let's come home, for there's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine. Maybe we should change and sing that this morning, huh? But that's what it's talking about, written in heaven. Imagine in heaven, your name is there. Your name is there. Now, some people say that we'll be given a new name. It does talk about that in heaven, and I'm not sure if we covered it out in the bulletin, in the what's reserved for you part of the bulletin. But it doesn't mean we'll lose our identity of our names now. For instance, when Paul, and John, no, Peter, Paul, John, the guys on the Mount of Transfiguration, why am I suddenly, what? Peter, James, and John. It wasn't Paul. Peter, James, and John. We were talking about Paul before service. Thanks a lot for getting him stuck in my mind there. When they went up to the Mount of Transfiguration, they saw who there? Yeah, they knew them as Moses and Elijah. And so it is, and I really encourage you to read the bulletin today, because it talks about the part on heaven. It talks about, will we have our memories of our earthly life in heaven? Well, yes. It'd be silly for God to call you and say, oh, by the way, here's your reward. You go, what's that for? For everything, well, those things that you did for me on earth. I don't remember anything like that. It doesn't make sense, does it? So certainly we'll have these memories. In fact, we even have the bad memories. You say, what? Remember the Lazarus and the rich man and Lazarus? It says Lazarus was comforted. Why was he being comforted? Why would he need to be comforted? Because he would recall those things that he had, as a beggar, that he would suffer on earth. So certainly we'll have our memories, and we'll have our names. Now, yes, we'll be given a new name that only we and God knows, but it's sort of like God would often do that. You have, and it's not only for this reason, you have Paul and Saul, but that was more an ethnic thing there. So we'll have our identity, we'll have our names. We're not going to be just a makeover of us. We'll be a perfection of us, but not a makeover. But our name will be written down. It is written down in heaven. And it goes on in verse 23, to God the judge of all. The judge of all. We're going to talk about this in the morning service to open the message. But people hate to think they're being judged. Even folks who post things, they'll say, don't judge me. So whatever they posted was really stupid, and they go, but don't judge me. I love people who say, well, you're intolerant and judgmental. I say, well, you would know because you just were. You can never say that to somebody without becoming that yourself. And we all judge in certain ways. It's not just judging, is it righteous judgment? Is it proper judgment? But God is always the right and fair and proper judge. He's never off. There never has to be, like right now, people who are on death row, there are certain organizations that go back and review those cases, and sometimes have found some that were not guilty, and they've been released and given a lot of money. Rightly so. If a person didn't do the crime, they shouldn't have to pay for it, right? But it won't be that in hell. No one will be going through hell and saying, we just reviewed your record again, and new evidence is coming in, and we had DNA now we didn't have back when you did that. And so we are going to let you out and take you to heaven and give you $10 million. And that won't be, because the judgment is spot on. Because who is the judge? God. And what does God have? Well, all the omnis, right? And it goes on to say, and to the spirits of just men made perfect. That's what we're going to be, the just men made perfect. And then it goes on to say, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant. That's what he's trying to contrast. Sinai, old covenant, Zion, new covenant. And to the blood of sprinkling, which speaketh better things than that of Abel. So you can see what he's trying to do here. He's trying to get them excited about heaven, about what they have to look forward to if they continue to pursue Jesus Christ. Then we go to the last set of verses in this chapter, 25 through 29. And he's going to bring up the consequences of apostasy. What book is a book in the New Testament that deals extensively with apostasy? Jude, yeah. You have the Acts of the Apostles in the book of Acts, and we're calling Jude on Thursdays in our Bible study the Acts of the Apostates, as such. So in verse 25, see that you refuse not him that speaketh, for if they escaped not, who refused him that spake on earth, so much more shall not we escape if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of the things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, because our God is a consuming fire. Why a consuming fire, by the way? Well, fire in the Scriptures is often a symbol of, what's that? Yeah, refinement, yeah. To refine us to be holy, a symbol of that refinement that leads to holiness. God is a holy God, a consuming fire. And when you get to Revelation chapter 1 and you see that image of Jesus, the one you never see a picture of, people say, well, that would scare the little boys and girls, wouldn't it? It is meant to bring holy fear into our lives. His eyes are flaming fire. So let's look at these verses and see that the consequences of apostasy. First, in verse 25, he's saying, listen to God. He says, see that you refuse not him that speaketh. And why? Because the people who spoke to you on earth, which were God's representatives, you couldn't escape what they said. What they said held true. So how much more is the one that speaketh from heaven? God. You can't just sit there and ignore him or refuse him or debate him. And his voice, whose voice shook the earth. And you'll see that in Revelation. It talks about that in chapter 21 and Exodus chapter 19. He commanded and it shook. But it says, now he promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not the earth only, but also heaven. I'm going to shake things up. And he goes on to say in verse 27, but the things that are shaken, the removing of those things that are shaken, as of the things that are made, and those things which cannot be shaken may remain. It's going to shake it all out, so to speak. Don't we say that sometimes? Well, in the end, we'll just shake it all out and see how it all comes out on it. And so this is that commandment that takes us into chapter 13. Look at verse 28, 12:28. Wherefore, receiving a kingdom. What kingdom is that? The kingdom of heaven. Kingdom spoken about in the verses 22, 3, and 4. Just like that. Receiving. Therefore, we receive this kingdom, which cannot be moved. It's stable, it's sure, it cannot be shaken, it remains. No one can attack it, no one can invade it, no one can conquer it. He says, what are we to do? Well, number one, what's the first thing we do in verse 28? Let us have grace. Let us understand what the grace of God is. Let us be grace-filled people. Let us be gracious people. To understand we didn't deserve any of this, but God's grace has given us all of it. But not only that, whereby we may serve God acceptably. So, if it says that He wants us to serve God acceptably, it implies that there is a way that you could try to serve God that is unacceptable. And that's why we got to be careful that we don't create in our own imaginations things that God would be okay with. I'm sincere. I think God would like it. I think God would be pleased with it. Well, stop and think what the Word tells us. Who is God and what does He want? What is He looking for in our life? To serve God acceptably. And you can't serve somebody acceptably unless you know the person, unless you know God. And the only way we know Him is in the Word. But not only acceptably, but He adds two things on there. With reverence and godly fear. Reverence and godly fear. Serving God is no joke. I think church has become a venue of entertainment sometimes. And we have trivialized God and worship. We have made it a fun thing. I see this all the time on posts that churches make, advertisements, is that we are fun. Come here because we have fun. Now, I'm not saying fun is bad unless it's bad fun, huh? But fun is usually based on what? How it makes us, what it does to us, our senses, how it makes us feel. The music is good and we're surrounded by the right people. So I think I'm not sure the word fun is the best word to use to describe church. I don't know. I think there's better words, more biblical words to describe church. Joy would be one of them, right? Joy, because joy is basically essentially something that starts inside and comes out to be joyfulness, where fun seems to be often that which is outside and tries to get in. So I think we ought to be, and I'm not going to say if a church says, hey, we're going to have fun games for the kids, they're all going to go to hell or anything like that. But what I'm saying is we need to be purposeful in picking how we describe church and things of church, that it is joyful, glad. We'll have dinner here in a little bit, and right above the serving line, it talks about that He has given us fruitful seasons to fill our hearts with gladness. That's another great word. And just there's all kinds of biblical words that express the emotions we should have about church. But try to stay away from fun. I don't know, maybe it's just me. And our culture's filled with it. I don't know, I see a lot of churches I know pretty well, not necessarily around here, but across the country, where they think they've got to add all this stuff in to make sure everybody has a good time. And it's stuff we used to go to the county fair to do. Or the amusement park to do. By the way, that word amusement park, you know what it means? It comes from the word amuse, right? Amuse. Well, the word amuse is one of those words that has an A in front of it, amuse. Muse means to think, right? You're musing. Amusement means to not think. The amusement park's where you go where you don't have to think about much. You just have fun. But coming to church is not amusement, because certainly we want to be thinking. We want to be engaging our hearts and minds. we have joy and warmth and comfort, all those great things. So I guess we'll just move on. Huh? Serve God with reverence and godly fear. Buna and T. Haas were here. And this pops in my mind every time I read this verse. They're from, their home church is in Long Beach, Pacific Baptist Church. And they have a large Asian group that is there. So they have a service early or later for the people who speak, maybe it's Korean or something like that. Korean is it? And then the English service. But he says there's a real contrast between the two. If you were to get there for the Korean service and you walk in, you're not going to find people chit-chatting. You're going to find people in their pews before the service starts. And they're praying and they're thinking. And they're asking God to bless that service. He says, you go to the English service, and it's high fives and how are yous. And it's about everything non-God until the preacher says, all right, let's get started. And we flip the switch. And I'm not saying all those conversations are bad. I'm just saying, is there better conversations that we could have? Now listen, if we went to the ATV club, a meeting, you would talk about ATVing primarily. You would talk about the exciting trips you had. You'd talk about what the club is about. And finish that with any other club or group or whatever. When you come to church, what do you think that people at church would be talking about? And the beginning and throughout the thing, about the things of church, of God on it. And you're saying, well, you're going to be a killjoy if we can't. No, I want you to be interested in other people's lives and ask how God is blessing. But maybe let's try that this next time. So what has God's biggest blessing been in your life this week? Now, after the person passes out, because that's so unusual, and you help them get back off the floor, you set them down and say, well, go ahead and tell me, what is God's biggest blessing? Huh? So, with reverence and godly fear. For why? God is a consuming fire. Let's move to chapter 13. Got a few minutes to just kind of get started with this. And this, the last thing this is the performance of our faith. It's how do we live this faith out? It's going to get somewhat practical here. It's going to start with a whole list of duties, and then it's going to go into some delights that we have. The duties we need to do and the delights we will have. So what's the very first verse? 4 words, isn't it? 13:1. What is it? Let brotherly love continue. So the assumption was it was there, but it just needs to keep being there. It needs to continue, not only continue the sense of maintaining status quo, but continue as in more, increasing in those kind of things. Brotherly love. Brotherly love. We are brothers and sisters. Even when in 2 Peter, he's writing, and he's going to mention scripture that people the unlearned, they struggle with and so forth. And he's going to bring up another writer, a significant writer in the New Testament, Paul. And do you know what terminology he uses for Paul? Brother Paul. Brother Paul. And that is an endearing term. You don't hear it as much in this side of the nation as you do sometimes in the other. And I think it's maybe the faith tradition that's been longer in the southern United States. But growing up, I heard that just all the time. Brother or sister. Now, sometimes we use sister, and it's clunky because what do we call those Mormon missionary girls? We don't, but they do. Sister. And we call the boys elder, like 18 years old. You elder. But that's the terms they use. But for us, nothing wrong with using brother and sister. What's that one song? There's a verse to the Family Guy. You may hear us say brother and sister around here. It's because we're a family so dear. We're the family of God. That's all we are, huh? The family of God. Let brotherly love continue. And let's pause there and kind of wind down and ask, how do we do that? What's some ways brotherly love? reach out to people, or encourage them in their faith. Maybe if necessary, challenge them in their faith. Be a blessing to them. Brotherly love. To let people know that they come to a place where everybody's glad they're here, and everybody gives them a handshake or some gesture, and people know who they are and know their name. And I don't think this church has a big problem with that. I think this church does well, but let's never get to the place to think we have it wrapped up. We always could do better, because once you get to the thing of where you think you've got to the point, you start backing away from the point. It's like that, and I'll close with this. There's a fella, there's a young preacher going to be starting a church. He was asking about, as he's got a diploma from Bible college, and now he's got a certificate of ordination. He's asking, now how do you put those on your wall? I mean, do you include your this or that? And I said, well, you may want to put them in your drawer and just hide them in there so you don't look at them too often. But he said, one guy responded to his question and said, well, that one church, they gave their pastor a badge that said humble. And so he thought, well, that's very deserving. So he decided to wear it to church the next week, and the church decided to take it away from him. There's a little bit of, I don't know, what do you call that kind of humor? But that really is a teachable moment, isn't it, on it? So we always can do better, right? I think we do well. I think that's one thing. A lot of visitors will come in either while they're here or sometimes when they write us later. They'll say, your church is very friendly, very welcoming. But let us always be that, but even on deeper levels. And not only to our guests, but even among ourselves. Let's finish in prayer. Father, thank you for this day and the blessings of it. We think about this American holiday called Thanksgiving. And certainly while we should be thankful every day, it does cause us to stop, at least most of our world and culture, stop for a day and see how blessed we all are and how thankful we are. Yet, Father, at the same time, we know there are people who are struggling, and perhaps they don't see the good things that are in their life. Father, may we appreciate what we have and encourage them to, Father, even in the midst of their hard times, to see there's gratitude. Father, bless us in our singing, in the word that's being taught and spoken, and in the fellowship, that we may have joy unspeakable and full of glory. Thank you for Jesus, our wonderful and sweet Savior. Amen. Amen. Thank you.